Marcus Webb wiped hydraulic fluid from his hands and surveyed Bay 7 with the satisfaction of a man who'd made peace with his life's trajectory. The repair dock wasn't much: scarred metal floors, walls that hummed with the station's life support systems, and equipment that had seen better decades. But it was his. 5 years on Outpost Zenith had taught him that simplicity beat corporate politics every time, even if simplicity meant breathing recycled air that tasted like copper and working in artificial gravity that occasionally hiccuped during solar flares. The distress signal that pulled him from his morning coffee was standard frontier fare: ship in critical condition, requesting immediate dock and emergency repair. What wasn't standard was the vessel that limped into his bay trailing a plasma leak that painted bright scars across the darkness. Marcus whistled low, recognizing Varkari design even through the damage. The ship looked like something grown rather than built, all organic curves and crystalline surfaces that caught light in ways human engineering never quite managed. It was beautiful even half destroyed, which said something about Varkari aesthetic priorities. The airlock cycled with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and a woman emerged into the bay's harsh lighting. Varkari, obviously. Her ears swept back from her skull in those distinctive elegant curves that human xenobiologists had spent decades trying to explain through evolutionary theory. She was covered in dust and what looked like dried coolant, her clothing expensive but torn in ways that suggested violence rather than accident. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone operating on adrenaline and fear, her eyes scanning the bay like she expected threats to emerge from the shadows. "You the mechanic." Her voice carried that harmonic undertone all Varkari had, like someone singing and speaking simultaneously. It made even simple questions sound like music. "Marcus Webb. And you're leaking plasma at a rate that'll empty your reserves in about 3 hours, so let's skip the pleasantries and talk about what happened to your ship." He was already moving toward the vessel with his diagnostic scanner, professional instinct overriding social niceties. She blinked, clearly unused to such directness. "Can you fix it?" "Won't know until I run diagnostics, but I've kept worse things flying." "You got a name, or should I just call you desperate client number 47? "Sira." A pause, like she was testing the name in her mouth, deciding if it fit. "Just Sira." Marcus nodded, already interfacing his scanner with the ship's damaged systems. "All right, just Sira, I'm going to need access to your engine compartment, your crystalline core chamber, and you're going to need to not hover over my shoulder while I work. There's a waiting area with terrible coffee and chairs that were uncomfortable when they were new 20 years ago. Entertainment system's broken, but there's a window with a decent view of the star if you like watching things slowly die. I'd prefer to stay with the ship." "Suit yourself. Fair warning, I talk to myself when I work. Habit from too many years of solo repairs. Also, I sometimes argue with the equipment, and occasionally the equipment wins." He meant it as a casual comment, trying to ease the tension radiating from her like heat from an engine, but he noticed her shoulders relax fractionally. Good. Nervous clients made mistakes, asked for rushed work that compromised safety, and something in her eyes suggested she was already operating at her stress limit. The initial diagnostic scan made Marcus wince and let out a low whistle of professional dismay. The ship's crystalline core, the heart of Varkari propulsion technology that turned harmonic frequencies into faster-than-light travel, had multiple fractures spreading like spider webs through the lattice structure. The harmonic stabilizers were so catastrophically misaligned, they were actually fighting against each other, creating destructive interference patterns. And the entire propulsion matrix looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to a Stradivarius violin and then set the pieces on fire for good measure. What happened? And don't tell me asteroid collision unless you hit about 15 asteroids in very specific, strategically important locations. Sira was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could practically hear her weighing how much truth to share with a stranger. "I was attacked, My escorts didn't survive, I barely did. Marcus glanced back at her, catching the genuine grief in her expression before she masked it with that careful neutrality he recognized from people who'd learned that showing emotion was dangerous. I'm sorry, anyone still chasing you? I don't know, possibly, probably. Then we'd better work fast. This is a week's job minimum if we do it right, but I can prioritize propulsion and life support. Get you flying in maybe 4 days if I don't sleep much and mainland caffeine. I can pay extra for speed. Not about the money, though I won't turn it down. It's about not cutting corners that'll get you killed mid-jump. Marcus pulled up a holographic schematic of the damage, the red highlighted sections outnumbering the green by a depressing margin. See this? Your crystalline core is fractured in 3 places. Push it too hard before proper repair, and it could shatter completely. That happens during a hyperspace transition, and you'll be scattered across about 6 parsecs in a pattern that'll confuse salvage crews for decades. Sierra moved closer to study the schematic, and Marcus noticed she focused on the technical details with more intensity than he expected from a typical passenger. The harmonics are completely degraded. The resonance patterns are inverted in the secondary matrix. You know ship systems? Marcus asked, genuinely surprised. I've studied them, theory mostly. I understand the principles of crystalline propulsion and harmonic engineering. Theory's about to get very practical. I'm going to need steady hands and someone who can sense harmonic frequencies while I recalibrate the core. Standard human hearing can't pick up the ranges I need to monitor. You volunteering? She nodded, something shifting in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief at being treated as useful rather than fragile cargo to be protected and handled with excessive caution. They worked through the afternoon, Marcus explaining his process in the running commentary he developed to fill the silence of solo repairs. He talked about the differences between human and Varkari engineering philosophy, about why he'd learned to respect crystalline technology even though it terrified him with its precision requirements, about the time he'd accidentally created a harmonic feedback loop that made everyone within 50 meters temporarily hear colors. Sierra listened with an attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite tolerance, asked questions that revealed understanding deeper than she'd initially admitted, and occasionally pointed out Varkari-specific considerations his human training had missed. When they reached the delicate task of realigning the harmonic stabilizers, a process that required sensing frequency shifts measured in microhertz, Sierra's natural Varkari sensitivity proved invaluable. Marcus handled the mechanical calibration with tools that looked like they belonged in a surgical theater, while she monitored the crystalline resonances with her species' innate ability to perceive harmonic patterns humans couldn't detect without specialized equipment. She called out adjustments with precision that would have impressed his most demanding engineering instructors back on Earth, the ones who'd told him he had talent but lacked the patience for truly delicate work. "You're good at this," he said, making a micro-adjustment to the third stabilizer while sweat dripped down his face from the concentration. "Sure you're just a passenger, because you handle harmonic calibration like someone who's done it professionally." "I've had excellent teachers." She hesitated and Marcus caught the careful editing happening in real time. "Your approach is different from Varkari engineers, more improvisational. You don't follow the standard procedures." That's the polite word for it. My instructors back at the academy called it flagrant disregard for proper procedure and a personal insult to the concept of engineering discipline. Marcus grinned, not looking up from his work. "But I've kept more ships flying with improvisation than I ever did following the manual. Varkari engineering is beautiful, elegant, efficient, mathematically perfect. Also incredibly fragile if one thing goes wrong, because everything's so precisely calibrated that there's no tolerance for error. And human engineering. Redundant, adaptable, and held together by duct tape, prayer, and sheer stubborn refusal to admit defeat. We build things expecting them to break, so we make them fixable with whatever's available. Your people build things expecting perfection, so when they break, it's catastrophic because there's no plan B. Sierra's laugh was unexpected, musical and genuine, making her ears flutter in a way that Marcus's xenobiology training told him indicated delight or amusement. That's the most accurate critique of Varkari design philosophy I've ever heard. She caught herself mid-sentence. My teachers would be simultaneously horrified and impressed by how precisely you've identified our fundamental weakness. They worked past station midnight, the chronometer marking time that meant nothing in the artificial day-night cycle of a space station. They were sustained by Marcus's emergency rations, protein bars that tasted like someone had compressed sawdust and optimism into rectangular form, and terrible coffee from a machine that had been brewing the same basic recipe since before humanity had reached the stars. Sierra tried the coffee once, made a face that transcended species barriers and communicated universal disgust, and stuck to water for the remainder of the night. During a break around 3 in the morning, sitting on the deck with their backs against a tool chest that had seen service on 4 different stations, Marcus shared a protein bar that claimed to be chocolate-flavored, but tasted more like a distant memory of someone describing chocolate to someone else who'd never actually tasted it. "Why'd you leave Earth?" Sierra asked, surprising him with the personal question. In his experience, most clients didn't care about his background beyond his repair credentials. Long story, short version. I was good at my job, too good according to corporate headhunters, and various corporate interests decided my skills were valuable enough to fight over. Lots of pressure, lots of politics, lots of people treating me like an asset to be acquired instead of a person with preferences and boundaries. He shrugged, taking another bite of the protein bar and immediately regretting it. Out here, ships don't care about my market value or my potential profit generation. They just care if I can fix them. It's honest work with honest problems that have honest solutions. So you fled. Not a question, but a statement of recognition. More like strategically relocated to somewhere I could breathe without feeling like every breath was being monitored and analyzed for productivity metrics. He glanced at her, seeing his own exhaustion reflected in her expression. "You're running from something too. None of my business what, but I recognize the look. I've seen it in the mirror enough times." Sierra met his eyes and he saw her weighing something, truth against safety, trust against survival. "I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. Powerful people want me silenced permanently. I'm trying to reach allies in the core worlds who can help, who can protect me long enough to expose what I know." It wasn't the whole truth. Marcus could tell from the careful way she phrased it, the gaps in the narrative. But it was enough truth for the frontier, where asking too many questions was considered both rude and potentially dangerous to your continued health. "Then we'd better get you flying. How much time you figure you have before they trace you here?" "Less than I'd like. Maybe a day, possibly 2 if I'm fortunate. They're thorough and they have resources I can't match." Marcus did the math in his head, calculating repair time against pursuit time, safety against necessity. "I can get you space-worthy in 2 days, properly safe in 4. 2 days means temporary fixes, jury-rigged solutions, and significant risk of catastrophic failure mid-jump if anything goes wrong. 4 days means you'll make it home with reasonable certainty. Your call, but I need you to understand the stakes. 2 days, I don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect repairs." "Figured you'd say that." He stood, offering her a hand up with grease-stained fingers. "All right, Jasira, let's make your ship fly on a prayer. Some very creative engineering, and my personal reputation for keeping impossible things operational." They worked through the night and into the next day, and Marcus found himself explaining more than the work required, talking about Earth, about the blue skies he sometimes missed, about the mechanics of human space travel, and why humanity's approach to faster-than-light technology was considered laughably primitive by most species. He talked about why he found peace in taking broken things and making them whole, about the satisfaction of solving problems that had clear solutions if you were willing to think creatively. Sierra listened with attention that felt qualitatively different from polite interest. She absorbed his words like they mattered beyond their technical content, asking questions that suggested she was trying to understand not just what he did, but why it mattered to him. Somewhere around 4 in the morning on the second day, while Marcus was elbow-deep in a propulsion coupling that had clearly never been designed for human hands, Sierra asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving everything behind?" "Sometimes. Mostly no. I miss Earth food, real fruit that grew in soil instead of this reconstituted synthetic stuff that tastes like the concept of fruit rather than actual fruit. Miss my sister and her kids. Miss knowing that if I looked up, I'd see a sky that was blue because of atmospheric scattering instead of artificial color generation." He extracted himself from the coupling, wiping grease on a rag that had given up on being clean approximately 5 years ago. "But out here, I'm just Marcus the mechanic. Not an asset, not a commodity, not a profit center or a resource to be leveraged. Just a guy who fixes ships and does honest work. That's worth more than blue skies." "You're not just running from something. You're running toward something too." "How do you figure?" "Because running from is panic and desperation. You're scared, yes, but you're also at peace with your choices. That's running toward a life you chose, not away from one you couldn't tolerate." Marcus considered this, surprised by her insight. "Maybe. Yeah, I guess you're right. What about you? You running from or toward?" Sierra was quiet for a long moment, her ears tilting in a way that suggested deep thought. "Both. There are people who need me, people who depend on what I know. I can't help them if I'm dead, so I'm running from the people who want to kill me. But I'm running toward the chance to make things right, to expose corruption and protect those who can't protect themselves." "Sounds like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." "Several worlds, actually." She said it lightly, but Marcus heard the exhaustion underneath. "Then let's make sure you survive to carry it. Come on, this coupling isn't going to calibrate itself, and I need your frequency sensitivity for the final adjustments." They returned to work, and Marcus thought about secrets and trust, about the strange connection forming between a human mechanic and a Varkari woman with shadows in her eyes and knowledge that went far beyond casual passenger interest. He thought about how sometimes the most important thing you could offer someone wasn't solutions, but simply working alongside them, treating them like they mattered as people rather than problems to be solved. Outside, through the bay's observation window, Outpost Zenith continued its endless orbit around a dying star, and somewhere in the dark between worlds, someone was hunting. But for now, in the warm light of the repair bay, 2 people worked side by side, building something that would carry one of them home. 4 days into the repair work, Marcus was running on stimulants that tasted like chemical warfare and spite, but Sierra's ship hummed with the kind of jury-rig stability that would make proper Varkari engineers weep tears of professional horror. He'd sacrificed elegance for functionality, replaced precision calibration with redundant backup systems, and created something that was half Varkari grace and half human stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was ugly by Varkari standards, violated about 40 design principles, compromised aesthetic integrity, and would absolutely get her home alive. Then the station's communication system crackled with a priority broadcast that made his blood run cold. 3 Varkari military vessels requesting emergency dock clearance, citing imperial authority, and a high-priority search operation for a fugitive of extreme importance to galactic security. Marcus was underneath Sierra's ship, finalizing the last propulsion coupling with tools that were technically designed for completely different purposes, when he felt rather than heard her sudden terror. The temperature in the bay seemed to drop despite unchanged environmental controls. He slid out on his maintenance crawler and found her pressed against the bay wall, eyes wide, ears flat against her skull, and what he'd learned over the past days meant extreme distress or mortal fear. "Sierra, talk to me. What's happening?" "They found me." Her voice was barely a whisper, stripped of the harmonic undertones that usually characterized Varkari's speech. "I need to leave. Right now. Immediately." "The ship's not ready for." "I don't care if it's ready. I don't care if it explodes the moment I enter hyperspace. I cannot be here when they dock. You don't understand what they'll do." Marcus made a decision in the space between heartbeats, moving to his control panel and activating the bay's privacy shields, modifications left over from when Bay 7 had been used for less legal operations by its previous owner. External sensors went dark, blocking the ship's energy signature from station monitoring systems. "They're docking in Bay 12, he said, monitoring station chatter through his security feed. "You've got maybe 20 minutes before they start systematic bay-by-bay searches. Protocol says they'll hit the commercial bays first, work their way to the independent operators." "Why are you helping me?" Sierra's question was sharp with desperation and confusion, and something that might have been hope. "You could turn me in, collect whatever reward they're offering. You don't owe me anything. But already committed to fixing your ship and getting you home safe. Little late to change the contract terms now." He returned to the vessel, working faster than safety protocols recommended. "Besides, I've built a reputation on finishing jobs and treating clients right. Bad for business if my customers get arrested before they can spread word about my excellent work and reasonable rates." It was a weak joke, an attempt to diffuse the crushing tension, but it made her breathe again instead of hyperventilating toward panic. She moved closer to where he worked, watching his hands with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every movement, every tool selection, every adjustment. The bay doors chimed, someone requesting entry with official override codes. Marcus checked his security feed and saw 2 Varkari in military enforcement insignia, their ears adorned with rank markers and authorization credentials that gave them access to virtually anywhere on the station. "Hide," he whispered to Sierra, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of station systems. "Maintenance crawlspace, behind the tool locker in the northeast corner. There's a false panel I use for storing parts. I don't want station inspectors seeing." She disappeared into the shadows with surprising grace and speed, moving like someone with training in covert operations. Marcus wiped his hands, arranged his expression into mild professional annoyance, and opened the bay doors to face the agents. The 2 Varkari were polite but carried themselves with the controlled threat of people authorized to use extreme force if circumstances warranted. Their eyes scanned the bay with practiced assessment, cataloging every detail, every ship, every potential hiding place. "We're searching for a fugitive of extreme importance to the Varkari Empire. High-value target, potentially dangerous. You've worked on any Varkari vessels in the past week." Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't allow any telltale pause that might suggest deception. "Just human ships and 1 Tellaran freighter that needed its atmospheric recyclers replaced 3 days ago. Nothing Varkari. Why someone steal a ship or commit some kind of serious crime? Information is classified. You'll report any Varkari arrivals immediately to station security. This is not optional." "Sure thing, though between you and me, I mostly get human clients out here. Varkari tend to use the fancy corporate bays in the premium section with proper facilities and certification. I'm more the desperate and broke demographic. My rates are competitive, but my amenities aren't exactly 5-star. The taller agent's ears twitched with something that might have been amusement at his self-deprecation. They scanned the bay once more, their attention lingering on the various human ships in various states of disassembly, the tools scattered with the organized chaos of someone who knew exactly where everything was despite appearances, and finally on Marcus himself, grease-stained, exhausted, and projecting an aura of someone whose biggest concern was meeting repair deadlines. "You see anything suspicious, any Varkari acting strangely, you report it immediately. Understood. Absolutely. I'm very pro-cooperation with law enforcement. Bad for business to harbor fugitives. They left with curt nods, and Marcus waited until they were completely gone before triggering the door locks and activating additional privacy measures. Sierra emerged from hiding, and he saw her hands shaking despite her attempt to maintain composure. You lied for me, to Imperial military agents. That's a serious crime. Yep, wasn't even that hard. I lied to station security about 3 times a week regarding various safety violations and unauthorized modifications. Adds up to a comfortable level of dishonesty. He returned to the ship, checking his chronometer. But we've got a bigger problem. They're doing systematic searches with increasingly sophisticated sensor equipment, which means they'll be back with gear that can penetrate my privacy shields. You need to leave like yesterday. The repairs aren't complete. They're complete enough. Barely. You'll make it to the Varkari core worlds if you don't push the engines past 60% capacity. Avoid any unnecessary maneuvering that stresses the crystalline matrix, and pray to whatever deities your people believe in that the core doesn't decide to fracture during hyperspace transition. It's not safe by any reasonable definition, Sierra, but it's the absolute best I can do with the time we have. She moved to stand directly beside him, close enough that he could see the intricate biological patterns on her ears. Not decoration, but something innate, like fingerprints or retinal patterns, unique to each individual. Why, you don't know me beyond 4 days of conversation. This puts you at serious risk of arrest, prosecution, possibly worse. Why would you do this for a stranger? Marcus stopped working and faced her directly, meeting her eyes with complete honesty. Because you're terrified. Because someone's hunting you and you're alone and desperate. Because I've been in positions where powerful people treated me like I didn't matter, like I was just a resource to be used or discarded based on their convenience, and I swore I'd never be that person who stood by while someone needed help. He grabbed a clean rag, a genuine miracle in his perpetually grease-covered bay, and wiped his hands. Besides, you've been straight with me. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough truth. You helped with repairs, shared your knowledge, treated me like an equal instead of hired help. That counts for something. I haven't told you everything. There are things about who I am, what I'm running from. Don't need to know everything. Just need to know if you're someone worth helping, and yeah, I think you are. My moral compass might be miscalibrated, but it's pointing pretty clearly at help this person. Sierra's expression shifted through emotions Marcus couldn't quite read. Surprise, gratitude, something that looked like grief or regret, and finally something that might have been wonder. You're remarkable. Your entire species, this capacity for kindness to strangers, this willingness to sacrifice your safety for principles rather than calculating advantage. It's rare, precious. It's really not that special. Most humans are basically decent if you give them the chance and don't push them into corners where fear makes them cruel. Marcus pulled up the ship's final diagnostic display, showing mostly green indicators with only a few cautionary yellows. You're good to go. Fuel cells fully charged, life support stable and redundant, propulsion functioning within acceptable parameters for careful flight. Still recommend staying under 60% thrust and avoiding combat or evasive maneuvers until you can get comprehensive repairs from proper Varkari technicians, but you'll make it home. Come with me. Marcus laughed, thinking it was exhaustion-induced humor. Then he saw her face, completely serious, almost desperate, and realized she meant it. Sierra, I can't just abandon everything. I've got a business here. Contracts with clients who depend on me, a lease on this bay that took me 3 years to negotiate down to reasonable rates. I can compensate you for all of that and more. I can, she stopped herself, seeming to catch something before she revealed too much. I'm asking you to trust me. Come with me to the Varkari core worlds. I promise you won't regret it. I can offer you opportunities, protection, resources you can't imagine. There was something in her voice, some quality of authority and certainty that suggested this, was more than a grateful client offering a generous reward. But Marcus shook his head, feeling the weight of his decision. This is my place, Sierra, out here on the edge, fixing things and living simply. I'm not built for core world life, too many people, too much politics, too many complications. I came out here specifically to escape that. He smiled to soften the rejection, hoping she'd understand. But I genuinely appreciate the offer, really. It means a lot. Sierra looked like she wanted to argue, wanted to reveal something that would change his mind. But station communication chatter suddenly spiked with multiple alerts. The search teams were moving to the next section, employing enhanced sensor sweeps. They were running out of time measured in minutes rather than hours. Go, Marcus said firmly, moving to his control console to begin launch preparations. Before they lock down all departures and trap you here. She moved toward her ship, each step seeming reluctant, then paused at the airlock threshold. If I survive this, I'm coming back, to thank you properly, to repay this debt. If you survive, send me a message so I know my repairs held together and you made it home safe. I've got a professional reputation to maintain, and clients survived desperate flight from military pursuit is excellent advertising in certain circles. She smiled, genuinely smiled, and her ears did that flutter of delight he'd come to recognize over their days working together. Then she was aboard, the airlock sealing behind her, and Marcus was orchestrating her departure with every trick he'd learned from years on the frontier. He overrode departure protocols, masked her energy signature within a scheduled cargo transport sensor shadow, and used every modification in his base systems to give her the maximum possible head start. He watched her ship accelerate into the darkness, plasma trail bright against the stars, and felt the strange hollow emptiness that came from knowing he'd probably never see her again. Marcus returned to his bay, already composing creative explanations for the Varkari ship that had definitely not been there if station security came asking uncomfortable questions. He was planning elaborate lies when his communication console lit up with a priority override signal that made every other system in the bay go silent. The face that appeared was Varkari, male, older, with ears so heavily adorned with official insignia that Marcus immediately pegged him as someone very important and potentially very dangerous to his continued comfortable existence. Marcus Webb, I am Commander Thane of the Imperial Varkari Fleet. I'm tracking a vessel that departed from your bay approximately 7 minutes ago. I need complete information about that ship and its passenger. Immediately. This is not negotiable. Marcus's mouth went dry, but he'd committed to protecting Sierra, which meant committing to the lie completely. Half-truths would unravel under professional interrogation. Yeah, I repaired a Varkari ship over the past few days. Client paid well for privacy and discretion, which I provide as part of my service. That's kind of my whole business model out here, quality repairs and keeping my mouth shut about who comes and goes. The passenger's identity, now. Didn't ask, didn't care, don't know. She paid in untraceable credit chips. Ship was severely damaged. I fixed it according to specifications. Pretty standard transaction for frontier work. That woman is extraordinarily important to the Varkari Empire and galactic stability. Lives, potentially millions of lives, depend on finding her safely and quickly. Then you should have found her before she left my bay. Marcus kept his voice level despite his racing heart. Look, Commander, I run an independent repair operation, not an interrogation center or intelligence gathering station. Client wanted privacy and discretion. I provided both. That's the service I sell. Violating that would destroy my business reputation. Thane's expression hardened into something that suggested he was calculating whether threats or violence would be more effective. You're obstructing an imperial investigation of the highest priority. I'm honoring my business contracts on an independent station outside direct Varkari jurisdiction. Different things entirely. Marcus met the commander's gaze without flinching. I don't know what your fugitive allegedly did, but I know she paid fairly for honest work, didn't threaten anyone, and left legally through proper departure channels. Beyond that, I've got nothing for you." They stared at each other across the communication link, and Marcus recognized the exact moment when Thane realized threats wouldn't work on someone who'd already made peace with being inconvenient to powerful people, and accepting the consequences. "If she contacts you again through any channel, you will notify Imperial authorities immediately. That's not a request, Mechanic Webb. That's a direct order with legal force." The communication cut off abruptly, and Marcus sat alone in his suddenly quiet bay, surrounded by the tools of his trade, wondering if he just made the biggest mistake of his life, or done the only right thing in an impossibly complicated situation that he didn't fully understand. 3 days later, station security did come asking questions with the kind of polite persistence that suggested they'd keep asking until they received satisfactory answers. Marcus maintained his story with the consistency of someone telling the truth. Anonymous client, standard emergency repair, paid in credit, departed legally through proper channels. They didn't believe him. He could see the skepticism in their expressions, but they couldn't prove anything, and eventually they left him alone to return to his normal work. Marcus tried to settle back into his comfortable routine, fixing ships, drinking terrible coffee, existing in the pleasant isolation of frontier life, where his past didn't matter and his future extended no further than the next repair job. Except now he found himself watching incoming traffic more carefully than necessary, wondering if a certain sleek Varkari vessel might return, if just Sira would keep her promise to send word that she'd survived. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then a full month. Marcus told himself he'd been right not to ask too many questions, right to let her disappear into whatever complicated political situation had brought her to his repair bay in the first place. He'd done his job professionally, she'd survived to continue whatever important mission drove her, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Then one morning, his entire communication system simultaneously lit up like someone had plugged it directly into a star. Priority overrides on every channel, station-wide broadcast that made alarms scream across Outpost Zenith and brought all normal operations to a complete halt. The holographic display materialized showing a Varkari woman in formal ceremonial robes that probably cost more than Marcus's entire bay, including all equipment and tools. Her ears were adorned with precious metals and crystalline ornaments that marked her as someone of extraordinary rank and importance. She looked tired but vibrantly alive, regal, but carrying herself with the kind of authority that suggested she commanded respect through competence rather than simply demanding it through position. She looked exactly like Sira, except now she wore power like a second skin. "Citizens of known space," she began, her voice carrying that harmonic quality amplified to fill not just rooms but worlds. "I am Queen Seralith of the Varkari Empire, sovereign of 17 star systems, protector of the crystalline throne, guardian of harmonic peace. 17 days ago, I survived a coordinated assassination attempt orchestrated by corrupt elements within my own government. This attack killed my entire security detail, loyal people who died protecting me, and forced me into hiding while I gathered evidence and allies." Marcus sat down hard on his tool chest, his brain struggling to process the words Queen and Seralith and connect them to the scared woman who'd helped him calibrate harmonic frequencies and eaten terrible protein bars without complaint. "I speak now to confirm I am alive. I am reclaiming my rightful throne, and those who conspired against me will face justice according to Varkari law." Queen Seralith Sira continued, and her expression shifted to something warmer. "I survived this ordeal because of the exceptional kindness and competence of a human mechanic on Outpost Zenith, who helped me without knowing my identity, and continued protecting me after learning I was being hunted." Marcus Webb asked nothing in return, expected no reward or political advantage, and simply did what he believed was right despite the personal risks. The holographic image shifted, showing Marcus's face pulled from station records, and he realized with creeping horror that his comfortable anonymity had just evaporated across multiple star systems and countless billions of viewers. I declare Marcus Webb a friend of the Varkari Empire, granted full citizenship, complete legal protections, and all honors attendant to that title. Let his actions remind us all that the most powerful bonds between civilizations are forged not through elaborate diplomacy or strategic treaties, but through simple— She smiled slightly, and her ears did that familiar flutter— human decency given freely without calculation or expectation of reward. The broadcast ended, and Marcus's communication console immediately exploded with incoming messages that overwhelmed the system's capacity. Job offers from prestigious shipyards, interview requests from media across human and Varkari space, diplomatic inquiries, and one message marked personal priority directly from Queen Sralith that somehow bypassed all other traffic. He opened it with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline and shock. "Marcus, I'm sorry for the deception, though I suspect you've already figured out it was necessary for survival. I was Queen Sralith before I was Sira, but in your bay, working on repairs and eating terrible food and talking about lives we'd left behind, I was just Sira. That was the first genuinely honest interaction I'd had in years, maybe decades. Thank you for seeing a person instead of a political position or asset to be leveraged. I meant what I said about coming back. I always keep my promises. Give me time to secure my throne and deal with the traitors, then we'll talk. You're remarkable, Marcus Webb, and I'm fortunate our paths crossed. S. Marcus read it 3 times, then looked around his bay. His comfortable, anonymous, uncomplicated bay that represented 5 years of carefully constructed simple life, and realized everything had just become infinitely more complex than fixing broken ships. His console chimed again. Commander Thane, requesting immediate communication with urgent priority coding. Marcus considered ignoring it, but curiosity and a certain reckless acceptance of his new reality made him answer. Thane appeared, and his expression was carefully neutral in a way that suggested significant internal conflict. Mechanic Webb, it seems I owe you a profound apology. Had I known you were protecting Queen Sralith, rather than harboring a fugitive or obstructing legitimate law enforcement, you'd have done exactly what you did, Marcus interrupted, finding it easier to be blunt now that he'd apparently become some kind of galactic celebrity. Your job is protecting her. Mine was fixing her ship and keeping her safe. We both did our jobs according to our understanding. No apology necessary. Thane's ears twitched with what might have been respect or surprise at being interrupted. The Queen has formally requested your presence on Varkara Prime for official recognition and honors. A diplomatic vessel is being dispatched to Outpost Zenith with appropriate accommodations for human physiology. I didn't ask for any of this attention or recognition. No, which is apparently precisely why Her Majesty values your perspective and friendship. Thane almost smiled, the expression incongruous on his military stern features. For whatever my opinion is worth, Mechanic Webb, you kept her alive when I and my entire organization failed to do so. That matters more than I can adequately express. The communication ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts, his suddenly famous face, and the realization that his quiet life had been thoroughly disrupted by doing what he'd thought was simply the right thing. His console chimed one final time. Another message from Sralith, just 3 words that somehow carried more weight than all the formal declarations. Trust me, Marcus. He sat in the silence of Bay 7, surrounded by half-repaired ships and the comfortable clutter of his chosen life, thinking about queens and mechanics, about kindness given without agenda, about how helping one scared woman had somehow rippled outward to affect civilizations. Marcus pulled up his repair schedule, looked at the long list of committed jobs and clients depending on him, then made a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. He sent a reply to Sarilith. "I really hope you're worth disrupting my entire comfortable existence. Also, your ship better still be flying properly, because if it failed and you just got lucky, my professional reputation is going to take a serious hit." Her response came within seconds. "The ship is perfect. Your repairs saved my life in multiple ways. See you soon, friend. And thank you for everything, but especially for treating me like I was just someone who needed help." Sira, Marcus smiled despite himself, saved the message, and began the complicated process of temporarily closing his bay and explaining to very confused clients why the mechanic they'd hired was suddenly summoned to the Varkari imperial capital. Outside his window, Outpost Zenith continued its orbit, but Marcus Webb's universe had just expanded in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. 3 months later, Marcus stood in a palace that made Outpost Zenith look like a maintenance closet, wearing formal clothing that cost more than his repair bay's annual lease, and felt like someone had wrapped him in expensive discomfort. Varkari dignitaries circled him like curious exotic creatures examining something that didn't quite fit their understanding of the universe, treating him with a mixture of genuine respect and baffled curiosity about this human, who'd somehow become significant. The formal recognition ceremony had been exhausting. 2 hours of speeches in multiple languages, presentations about human Varkari cooperation, and diplomatic performances that made Marcus profoundly uncomfortable. According to Sarilith's private briefing earlier, his role in protecting her had become far more significant than just one mechanic helping one person. The assassination attempt had been the beginning of a planned coup orchestrated by rival factions, who'd calculated that killing Sarilith would destabilize the Empire enough for them to seize control of key systems and consolidate power before loyalists could organize effective resistance. Her survival, and more importantly, her dramatic return with evidence of the conspiracy and a compelling narrative about being saved by a frontier mechanic who embodied the best qualities of human Varkari friendship, had instead rallied loyalists, exposed the conspirators to public scrutiny, and transformed what should have been a successful assassination into a catastrophic political failure for her enemies. Marcus's role had become symbolic, proof that cooperation between species created strength, that ordinary individuals doing the right thing mattered more than elaborate political schemes, and so on through about 40 minutes of speeches that made him want to hide under furniture. He finally escaped the formal reception and found refuge on a balcony overlooking gardens that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought natural beauty needed significant improvement through precision engineering. The plants grew in mathematically perfect spirals, water flowed in patterns that created harmonic resonances, and the entire landscape felt more like an elaborate art installation than actual nature. "You look profoundly miserable," a familiar voice said, warm with genuine amusement. Sarilith, Queen Sarilith, wearing enough formal regalia to probably qualify as a structural engineering challenge, joined him at the railing. Up close, away from the crowds and cameras, she looked tired but satisfied, like someone who just finished a marathon and was still processing the accomplishment. "I look like a mechanic playing dress-up at a queen's formal party because that's exactly what I am." Marcus gestured at the palace stretching behind them, the carefully manicured gardens below, the distant spires of the capital city visible through atmospheric haze. "This isn't my world, Sarilith, or should I call you Your Majesty? I still don't actually know proper protocol, and I'm probably committing about 17 violations of formal etiquette just by standing here alone with you." "Sira," she said firmly, her ears tilting in that way he'd learned meant absolute certainty. "Here, in private moments away from court obligations and political theater, I'm just Sira. That's what you knew first. That's who I want to be with someone who sees me as a person." Pretty sure queens don't get to be just anything. Comes with the territory of ruling star systems. She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the gardens with an expression that suggested she found them as overwhelming and artificial as he did. In your repair bay, I got to be a person for the first time in longer than I can remember. Not a position to be managed, not a political asset to be leveraged, not a symbol to be manipulated. Just someone who needed help and received it without conditions or hidden agendas. I haven't forgotten what that felt like. So you dragged me across the galaxy to help you remember it. I brought you here to say thank you properly, to fulfill my promise, and to offer you a genuine choice. She turned to face him directly, and he saw vulnerability in her expression that reminded him of the scared woman who'd emerged from a damaged ship. Stay here. Accept my offer to become chief engineer for the Imperial fleet. Help redesign our approach to ship construction with your duct tape and optimism, philosophy that somehow works better than our precision engineering. Or return to Outpost Zenith with my gratitude. Enough financial compensation to never worry about terrible coffee or lease negotiations again. And the friendship of someone who values what you did more than I can adequately express. Marcus considered both options carefully, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down like malfunctioning gravity plating. There's a third option you haven't mentioned. Which is? I go back to my bay and my simple life fixing ships on the frontier. You visit when you need a break from being queen and dealing with politics and running an empire. We maintain friendship across the galaxy instead of trying to force me into a world where I fundamentally don't fit. He met her eyes. I'm not built for palaces and formal ceremonies, Sierra. But I am built for fixing things and being honest with people who need that. Which, I'm guessing, includes queens who spend most of their time surrounded by people telling them what they want to hear instead of what's true. Sierra's ears did that flutter of delight he remembered from the repair bay, and her smile was genuine enough to transform her entire expression. I was hoping you'd suggest that. My advisors think I should leverage our connection for maximum political and diplomatic benefit. Keep you here as a symbol of human Varkari cooperation. Parade you at important functions. Use our friendship as a diplomatic tool. But I'd rather just have a friend who tells me when I'm being stupid, feeds me terrible protein bars, and reminds me that positions and power matter less than treating people decently. I can definitely do that. Though next time you visit, I'm upgrading to the slightly less terrible protein bars. The ones that claim to be berry-flavored instead of just nutritionally adequate. That sounds wonderful. They stood in comfortable silence, watching unfamiliar constellations emerge in a violet sky. Two people from different worlds who discovered that the most important connections weren't forged through elaborate diplomacy or political calculation, but through simple moments of genuine human, or Varkari, interaction. Marcus, Sierra said quietly after a long moment, yeah. Thank you, not for fixing my ship or protecting me from assassins, or any of the dramatic things that make good stories. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, as a person worth helping instead of a position worth leveraging. Marcus smiled, thinking about all the complicated ways lives intersect, about kindness given freely without calculation of advantage, about queens and mechanics, and the unexpected bridges built between civilizations when people simply choose to treat each other with basic decency and respect. Anytime you need fixing, whether that's ships or perspectives or just someone to remind you that you're a person underneath the crown, I'm pretty good at making broken things whole again. She laughed, the sound carrying across the gardens like music that didn't need mathematical precision to be beautiful. And Marcus thought that maybe his life becoming complicated wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to his carefully constructed simple existence. After all, he'd always been better at improvisation than following standard procedures. The weeks following the formal recognition brought changes Marcus hadn't anticipated. His repair bay became something of a pilgrimage site for mechanics and engineers across human space who wanted to meet the guy who'd fixed a Queen's ship with improvised solutions and somehow become galactically famous. Station management offered him upgraded facilities in the premium section, which he declined because Bay 7's comfortable shabbiness suited him perfectly. More interestingly, Varkari engineering guilds began sending delegations to study his repair techniques, fascinated by his approach of building redundancy and adaptability into systems that Varkari philosophy insisted should be precisely calibrated for optimal efficiency. The cultural exchange went both ways. Marcus learned advanced harmonic calibration techniques that made his repairs significantly more effective, while Varkari engineers grudgingly admitted that sometimes good enough to work beat theoretically perfect but catastrophically fragile. Sira visited 3 times in the first 2 months, always arriving quietly without the formal entourage that usually surrounded queens. She'd spend a few days in Bay 7, helping with repairs when her skills were useful, drinking terrible coffee and complaining about it with good-natured humor, and talking about the challenges of governing an empire while trying to maintain some connection to who she was beneath the position. During her 3rd visit, while they were recalibrating the harmonic matrix on a badly damaged freighter, she mentioned casually that she'd established a formal alliance framework between human engineering guilds and Varkari technical institutes. Cultural exchange programs were being developed, joint research initiatives launched, and trade agreements expanded specifically around sharing technical knowledge and engineering philosophy. "You started a minor technical revolution," she said, adjusting a crystalline resonator with the precision she developed during their first desperate repair session. "Half my engineering advisors think you're a genius who's identified fundamental flaws in our approach. The other half think you're a dangerous radical who's corrupting our technical purity with human improvisation." "What do you think?" Marcus asked, making a micro-adjustment that would have violated several Varkari design principles, but would keep the freighter flying for another decade. "I think you were right about Varkari engineering being beautiful but fragile, and I think sometimes survival matters more than elegance." She stepped back, examining their work with satisfaction. "Also, I think you're a better friend than I probably deserve, and I'm grateful our paths crossed in that specific moment when I was desperate, and you were someone who simply helped without demanding explanations. You know I'm going to keep giving you terrible coffee every time you visit, right? It's basically tradition now. I'd be disappointed if you didn't." The 4th time Sira visited, she brought a proposal that Marcus initially thought was a joke. She wanted to establish a formal joint human Varkari technical academy on Outpost Zenith, using his bay as the initial practical training facility. Students from both species would learn each other's approaches, develop hybrid techniques, and generally work toward engineering philosophy that combined Varkari precision with human adaptability. "You want to turn my repair bay into a school. I want to create something that honors what we learned working together, that different approaches have different strengths, and combining them creates something better than either alone." Sira's expression was serious, her ears positioned in that way that meant she'd thought this through carefully. "You'd maintain your regular repair business, but you'd also teach a few students at a time. Share your knowledge, learn from them, build something that lasts beyond one dramatic rescue." Marcus considered the idea, feeling the familiar tension between his desire for simple, uncomplicated life and the growing realization that sometimes the most important things required accepting complexity. "I'm not a teacher. I'm a mechanic who talks to himself while working. You taught me harmonic calibration in 4 days, while repairing a catastrophically damaged ship under time pressure. You're absolutely a teacher, whether you recognize it or not." He thought about it for 3 days before agreeing, with conditions that he'd only take students genuinely interested in learning, rather than those seeking connections to the famous mechanic. and that his terrible coffee would remain a required part of the curriculum as a test of dedication. Sierra agreed immediately, her ears doing that happy flutter, and within 2 months the first joint class arrived. 3 humans and 3 Varkari, all young and enthusiastic and terrified of disappointing the legendary Marcus Webb, which made him profoundly uncomfortable until he put them to work, and they forgot to be intimidated while focusing on actual repairs. The program worked better than anyone expected. Students learned not just technical skills, but how to communicate across species barriers, how to value different approaches, how to build things that combine the best of both engineering traditions. Several went on to establish their own joint facilities across human and Varkari space, spreading the hybrid philosophy further than Marcus would have imagined possible from one desperate repair job. Looking back years later, sitting in Bay 7 with another generation of students working on ships that combined human and Varkari design elements seamlessly, Marcus sometimes reflected on how profoundly strange life could be. One scared woman needing help had transformed into a friendship that bridged civilizations, changed engineering education, and proved that sometimes the most important diplomatic achievements happen not in formal negotiations, but in repair bays where people simply treated each other with decency and respect. Sierra still visited regularly, though less frequently as her duties expanded, and the Empire's stability required her constant attention. But she always made time, always came back to Bay 7 when she needed to remember who she was beneath the crown, always drank the terrible coffee and complained about it with affection. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked during one visit, watching students work on a joint project that would have been impossible before their collaboration. "Helping me that day. Your life would be simpler if you just turned me in to Commander Thane." Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had become infinitely more complicated, famous when he'd wanted anonymity, responsible for teaching when he just wanted to fix ships, connected to galactic politics when he'd specifically fled to the frontier to avoid exactly that. "No," he said finally, meaning it completely. "Simple isn't always better, and I got something valuable out of the whole mess." "What's that?" "A friend who's a queen, students who might actually change how 2 species work together, and proof that sometimes doing the right thing leads to good outcomes instead of disaster." He smiled. "Also, I've got the best how I became famous story of any mechanic in human space. Can't buy that kind of reputation." Sierra laughed, and her ears did that flutter of genuine delight, and Marcus thought about bridges between worlds. Not the formal diplomatic kind built through treaties and negotiations, but the personal kind built through shared work, mutual respect, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing others as people worth helping regardless of their position or species. "Thank you, Marcus," she said quietly, "for everything but especially for being exactly who you are." "Right back at you, Sierra. Queen or not, you're still the person who helped me calibrate harmonics and ate terrible protein bars without complaining too much." "I complained extensively about the protein bars. But you still ate them. That's friendship right there." They returned to watching the students work. 2 people from different worlds who'd proven that sometimes the most powerful changes began not with grand gestures or elaborate plans, but with one person simply choosing to help another when help was needed. And in Bay 7, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of ships being repaired, and students learning to bridge the gap between species through honest work and shared respect, Marcus Webb was exactly where he belonged.